Hi, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy, the Pulpit Queen, and I'm reporting live from my little cabin in the woods where the temperature is dropping hourly. It is like getting really cold, but I'm talking to my California power couple who know everything there is to know about Hollywood, and they have worked on all aspects of television writing, films, boards, and Lorraine Despres has been an author, and now her husband Carleton Eastlake is going to be on our list coming up, and so they're going to be having a little talk with all of you. I'll jump in with a few things, but we want to open it up for anybody who has questions about what it's like out there in the book world and the film world. So, who wants to begin, Carleton or Lorraine?
This is my first appearance with a book, though Lorraine is a pro.
This is your debut?
Yeah, so this is my debut. So we actually have a script that is color-coded in our favorite colors, Lorraine's being green, though we're going to leave a lot of time at the end for questions. So Lorraine, hit it in the green.
Okay. Our talk is described as reporting from Hollywood by a couple who are both writers.
And one reason these linked topics obviously came up is because this is how the publisher describes my novel. A conflicted TV writer on location in Florida becomes obsessed with a mysterious woman at a nightclub when she upends everything he thought he understood about life, limerence, bonded love, power, creativity, paintball combat, and what psychologists and philosophers refer to as the hard problem of human consciousness. Monkeys and parrots do play a role, as does Chairman Mao, and in a cameo appearance, NASA. And there's the beautiful cover, which I'll wave around more later.
Oh, let me see. Hold it up.
There we go.
Monkey business. Oh my God, I love the cover.
Isn't that great?
It's so Florida.
Yeah, it's.
See that, Mandy Haynes?
Yeah. So it's available right now for pre-order on Kathy's site, though, Kathy, we got to search on the title because you don't have it in the special section yet.
We'll get
I'm sure she's working on it right now in the background. Anyway, it's probably bad advice to write only about what you know. But in this case, when it comes to Hollywood, that's exactly what I did, because I do know Hollywood, and it's what Lorraine knows. I mean, as Kathy mentioned, Lorraine wrote some very famous TV shows, including the Who Shot JR episode in Dallas.
She also produced famous television shows.
She wrote The Scandalous Summer of Cecile Blanc, which was a huge bestseller in Popewood Queen's book. And speaking about locations, because this book is about locations, and we're talking about some of the stress on couples about being on location. One year she was working, running a show in Berlin, Germany, when I was running a show in Vancouver, Canada. And Lorraine's been on the board of Women in Film and Penn USA. So take away the green section here. Yeah. And what have I done?
Carl was always my ideal. He was the TV writer producer for 25 years, filming in Florida, Paris, New York, Vancouver, Toronto, Sydney, and the Gold Coast in Australia. He served on a number of offices. He was on the board of the Writers Guild, and he was president of Penn Center USA.
So first we're going to discuss what it's like really to be a writer. And then we're going to turn to how being a couple who are both in the business may affect how you survive being a writer. So we're going to include some of the pluses and minuses of being a married couple in the business. I had to say, because sometimes it will make an audience, if they're a nice audience, feel very anxious for you when you start talking about how hard it is to be a writer and how writers go broke right and left. That Lorraine and I were extremely lucky. We did win the lottery. Unlike most novelists, unlike most Hollywood writers, as we'll discuss in a second, we made a fair amount of money and kept all of it. But that is not the typical story for couples or individuals that are struggling to break in and stay broken in. So we're going to watch the clock and beat our way through here. But first of all, if you know how to raise your hand, how many of you are indeed writers yourselves?
let me put this, I'm gonna put it back in gallery view so I can see. Writer, raise your hand if you're a writer. Okay,
And
some
we're
of them
trying
are
to go to gallery view without losing our notes. And well, how many do you see there, Kathy? Because we just have a strict view or else we're going to lose our notes.
Okay, I know I saw at least 5 or 6. There's way more than that, but go ahead.
How many of you actually work with a spouse in the same sort of job? There, I got gallery view.
Anybody work with a spouse? With the next 2 couples on the next panel do, but
Yeah.
they're not here yet. So anybody else?
Okay.
No.
No, you're lucky. No, you're not lucky at all. Okay, I'm trying to get back our screen here. Okay, so first what we're going to discuss is why is it stressful? Because it's very stressful to be a writer. So we're going to discuss very quickly the competition and job security and insecurity issues, the money issues, toxic bosses, overwork, plus what it's like to try and come up with totally new ideas and then see them ruined by somebody in the process. So just how stressful it is to be a writer, Lorraine?
People have this fantasy that writers do what they want, mostly do it in their bathrobes. It's sometimes true, even before COVID, that a writer may be in his pajamas, but that doesn't mean you're guaranteed sweet dreams. You may be having nightmares.
Oh.
Yeah. So like most fiction, my novel is not literal journalism. All the same, I'm about to read a passage that literally happened to me word for word. And even more amazingly, because I've been on location a lot of places, it actually happened in the setting of the novel. It literally happened in Florida on a location shoot. So in this, Liam, the young TV writer, who is about to fall in love with in the book, has taken the overnight red eye into Florida from California. And he tells us, that morning when the plane began its final descent, I'd chewed gum to clear my ears and suddenly felt a hard, crunchy nugget between my teeth. I'd popped the crown off a wisdom tooth and cracked it in 2 with my next chomp. So before checking into the hotel, I'd called the show's unit production manager to get the name of her dentist and sat atop my luggage just outside his door until his office opened. He'd poked the peg of my tooth with an explorer, next began tapping other teeth, tilting ever closer with his dental loops until his eyes brought to mind Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's. No mystery why I lost the crown, he said. You've ground your back teeth flat. How old are you? 33. That's young. Your job come with a lot of stress? I shrugged as best I could in his chair. I'm a television writer. He seemed impressed, which civilians often are, and admitted, as they often do, wished I worked in Hollywood, then added, I'd make a fortune selling bike cards. So that is about the level of actual stress you face when you're doing a television show.
As we go, we're going to illustrate some of this with readings from Carl's novel. But since we're talking about the business of writing, you're mostly hearing the passages of the book dealing with business. To hear the parts about sex, paintball combat, and cruising the Space Coast to see the missile launch, you'll have to come to a talk about sex in the modern literature or by the book.
Yeah, this is really a shame. We're talking about what it's like working in Hollywood instead of what it, well, anyway. So even before you get to talking about money or job or what a publication may pay and how that affects your whole life as a married couple, there is the constant stress, the constant issue of competition for jobs, whether it's on a TV show or slots on the publisher's list or position on Amazon rank list. So to give you a flavor of how intense that battle can be in Hollywood for control of a job, here's a description from my novel of the sort of thing that one way or another I have witnessed a lot of times, and I have been on more than one show like this. So Liam, the writer, has been dragged to a very high-end gentleman's club where he's been rescued from his evil bosses by a mysterious woman using the name at the moment Cynthia, who is working as a dancer, a stripper, that has a lot more going on. So she's asked him how he ended up on a TV show with these horrible producers she's just met at their table. And he tells her, the guy who created the series, his name was Frank, which was very apt, was a feature writer who knew nothing about running a show. To compensate for that, after the pilot was picked up, the producer who had optioned it brought in an experienced showrunner, ostensibly to teach Frank how to do it. But instead, they drove him off his own show while keeping me. You're saying that you feel like you're betraying Frank? Well, he still gets a fee for every episode produced. He has 2 daughters in college. If I help keep the show on the air, he'll be able to cover their tuition. That's what I told myself whenever I did feel like I was betraying him. But it was true. On his last day, Frank had said it to me himself. Oh, that's generous. What about these 2 new guys? You shot a look across the wide room towards Erica and Phil. Did you promise them the full writer experience too? They must have looked you over before they kept you. God knows they studied me like a bug and they thought they were only hiring me for 3 minutes. Well, I was polite. Oh yes, I had been. After my glittering youthful leap into the business at 28, I've been out of work again for nearly 2 seasons. After the first month, I've been too ashamed to date. Within 3, I'd learned to fear playing back my phone messages because of the calls from collection agencies and from friends I hadn't had the courage to tell. To Cynthia, I claimed, I tried to get out of it gracefully, except my agent wouldn't make the call. He said it was too late to find another job for me this season, and I couldn't break the contract anyway, which was true again, although I didn't admit to her what else my agent had said, which was, the career of an average writer in this town lasts 11 years. You want to be unemployed for half of them? So that is, I've had those conversations with agents. That is actually based on a study that the Guild did, but didn't publicize. It's that hard and it's that brutal, people stealing material and stabbing each other in the back on shows. But
Why is the competition so vicious and the job security so stressful? Well, it's pretty simple. The prize. If you win it, it can be gigantic. A tiny handful of winners with super bestsellers and a tiny handful of TV showrunners, usually not with just a single successful show in the air, but with a lot of super hits, can make millions and millions. So the big money drives a lot of people mad with competition and with competitive desire. And it attracts a lot of people like the toxic producers in Carl's novel, who are maneuvering to make the big bucks off the work of real writers. And the reality is, most people, even when successful, must struggle year to year to make the next sale, both in books and Hollywood.
so at any one time, the Writers Guild of America West has about 15,000 members, of whom only 11,000 have had at least one paid assignment in the past 4 or sometimes 7 years, depending on which metric you're using, and only 6,000 of whom have worked in the prior year, 6,000 out of 15,000. And as the passage I read just a moment ago mentioned, a career based on a kind of old and formal study now may only last a decade for a Hollywood writer. Lorraine and I are both life members of the Writers Guild. It only takes 15 years of employment, and it may even be a small job in a given year to qualify as a life member. Lorraine is one of a few hundred women, maybe now 1,000 that have qualified. And in total, there are only a couple of thousand living declared life members of the Guild. It is that hard to keep a career going even 15 years.
Yeah, even when you're not working much. And here's the thing about being a Hollywood writer. Once you break in, you almost always must quit your old career, your old job. But 10 or 15 years later, you may be finished in Hollywood and may have to find a new way to support yourself or restart the old way. I know a lot of lawyers who quit being a lawyer and worked for a few years in Hollywood, and then they were really screwed. It may seem difficult for print authors, different for print authors. People can self-publish, and even traditional publishers put out thousands of titles. But most of those publications, whether by yourself or by someone else, don't support a writer full-time, which leads to the question of money.
Lynn Seeger-Strong, an author, published an article titled "A Dirty Secret: You Can Only Be a Writer If You Can Afford It," last year in The Guardian, where writing about print authors who face even worse problems than Hollywood authors. She said, according to a 2018 Authors Guild study, the median income for all published authors for all writing was $6,080
You can't.
in 2017. Down, down from 10,500 in 2009. While the median income for all published authors based solely on book-related activities went from 3,900 to 3,100, down 21%. Roughly 25% of authors earned zero in income in 2017. In Hollywood, the pay is considerably better than it is for novelists, but only for that 6,000 that work in a given year. Those 6,000, after giving about 30% off the top to their agent, their manager, their lawyer, and paying their union dues, and paying enormous taxes because they have to pay usually on their full gross, on average took home a median net income in that year they worked of $80,000. But since they only work 60% of the time, 6,000 out of 11,000 current, 15,000 total, that averages to about 50,000 a year for a typical Hollywood writer. And that's just for the 1 or 2 decades that they're employed.
And as I pointed out frequently, they're trying to live on that money in the highest cost cities in the United States, Los Angeles and New York. Of course, many will have producer fees, which could double their earnings, but again, only while they're hot.
Because of this, at the WGA, and I produced the series of educational films that we show new members, we teach new members to save 1/3 to 2/3 of their income into long-term savings so they can be prepared for the future. And that always gets a horrified gasp at a new member orientation, but it's gosh darn important that they learn that, because I also sit on the basically the welfare committee, the membership and finance committee that hands out welfare grants on the recommendation of social workers for guild members that are truly crashing and burning. It's that hard. So here we get to the third issue, and we actually are on schedule here to have a nice question period, so I'm amazed. So take it away into the green, Lorraine.
The third issue, the stress on writers and their relationships of creating something new, and then often the misery of seeing their creations improved by others. If there's one way that writing differs from many other occupations, and that adds to the stress, is that the people know what doctors and truck drivers do, but very often they don't know what it's like to face an entirely blank computer screen and make up a story, and how that compares to other sorts of creative work.
So again, I have a passage about that in the novel, and this is from when the young writer and the dancer have first met, and she's interviewing him about what he really is, what he really does, while telling him nothing about herself, of course. But he's so distracted by falling in love at first sight, which he is, or being drunk, or sitting next to a nearly naked woman, that he's lost track of what she just said. So she shook her head. My silly words were dandelion fluff that had caught in her blue hair. Come on, you understand what I'm saying. She had the eyes of an Egyptian goddess. Outlined in coal, the eyes themselves were brilliant white with rings of blue fire surrounding pupils of infinite black depths. Those eyes converging on mine from an arm's reach away, and me drunk, and her nipples visibly rising against the silk of her open jacket with nothing on underneath. No, I didn't know what she meant, but God, I wanted to. Except, wait, are you any good, she asked, or do you plagiarize from other writers or simply fill in the blanks? Oh, yes, we were talking about being fabulous. Afraid lying or boasting would break the spell, I admitted. Depends on how you define it. But I tried to come up with at least one new thing each episode, a twist, an insight I hope nobody's seen before. Meaning you come up with your own stories? Yes, at least I did that, which was rarer than you'd suppose. Plenty of people in a story room of 8 or 10 writers can pitch an idea. Far fewer can craft complete stories week after week. That's what they mostly pay me for. Civilians almost always ask the same question with the same odd wording once they discover you're a writer on a TV show. Cynthia quoted it now. So when people say, oh, do they give you the story and you write it? How do you answer? I say, I'm the one who gives out the stories. And they look at me like I'm lying or saying something incomprehensible in Latin or Elvish. Because you're telling them you're an uncaused cause. You create new things out of thin air, which only gods can do. Oh, I imitate a lot, I said. Every writer reads other writers. I read screenplays I admire, outline them, books. I'm not sure anything I do is uncaused, really merely evolved. All the same, you can make up a person who never existed and have them die from cancer, and millions of people watch and cry because most of their mind and all of their tear ducts believe it's real. That's the word, creating a world. So
what doubles as stress is that after going through this really difficult creative struggle, other people, editors, critics, but also your own agent can ruin what you've created in prose. Or as the passage a few minutes ago described, particularly in Hollywood, they can basically steal it, pay you off, fire you, and ruin it.
which brings us to the fourth issue, where you have to live, having mentioned Hollywood.
Yeah, for Hollywood, you must live in Los Angeles, maybe New York, then possibly where they send you on location. But even in publishing depends on your ambition and money. You may have to go to New York and dig deep, or go wherever your MFA and a published book wins you a faculty job.
And I might add, we're amazingly on schedule here. We're going to have 15 beautiful minutes for questions and answers. So that brings us to the fifth issue, which is getting really near the end here before we talk about couples dealing with it. And that's the issue of overwork. If you're a Hollywood writer, once you have broken in, and boy, prose writers really know this, and we're getting to that, you may spend months with no constant work at all, then suddenly have an assignment, which will be to turn in a complete 120-page feature film story and screenplay from scratch in just 8 weeks, or sometimes 13 weeks. Those are the standard contract terms these days.
Oh my God.
TV in this age of streaming can be bad or worse. People on TV series have been known, happened to a friend of mine, to sleep at the studio, be told to bring in their sleeping bags and not leave the studio while they're in production on a comedy.
Carl didn't write this, but I had to do an episode of television overnight.
Yeah, Lorraine had to do an episode of
24
television
hours.
overnight.
But writing prose can also drive you crazy. Working on a novel takes zillions of hours, and it's often while you are also working at a day job, because most novelists earn so little. The novelists are also teaching classes or ghostwriting or doing corporate PR pieces or whatever they're doing during the day, or else raising the kids and keeping the household together while the spouse works to support them.
So summing all of that up before we talk about how that affects couples, this is an absolutely true story about the glamour and everything else of Hollywood. We were at the Mount Kenya Safari Club in Kenya during the Uganda Civil War, which was just over the border a few miles away. So there were only 4 of us brave enough to be at dinner at the Mount Kenya Safari Club, which is romantic in Hollywood lore. It was owned by Hollywood stars at one time. The other 2 people were a young Canadian woman who worked for the United Nations in refugee relief and was risking her life every second while she was in Cambodia for lots of obvious reasons. And the man she was with turned out to be the transportation king of East Africa. He ran the truck lines in from the coast through the Civil War areas into Uganda to feed the place and whatever else he did. So they explained at great length how they literally stayed alive day to day, how they mapped out all the roadblocks held by the rebel groups, how they figured out how much to bribe them and where and which warlords to cut deals with, so literally they would not be murdered or their staff murdered for their shoes. Then they finally asked us what we did, and we said, we're writers. They looked, this is absolutely true. They looked surprised and shocked and dismayed. And with perfect sincerity, the transport king of East Africa said to us, but isn't that a terribly chancy occupation? So that is how sensible people view writers. So now we're in part 2 and almost there. Take it away, Lorraine. We have 5 more minutes before we got to let people ask questions about this.
Yes.
Go.
Okay. We have a ton of positive things to say, but there are also downsides to being a couple who writes. So we will tell you the bad news and the good news. competition and employment security or employment insecurity, minus two people may possibly use up the job opportunities they know about twice as fast, minus they may feel envy and make fraught direct comparisons of their careers, which can be hard on morale.
Oh, man. 2 writers or 3 writers in the house when Karen was here comparing our deals and whose agent had returned the calls.
But a plus, on the other hand, they double the number of networking connections and real friendships and double the information about opportunities. And they also have a writer's room they can take writing problems to.
So, for example, Lorraine found me my very first agent in film. I recently found Lorraine her agent in film and for prose when her old agent had certain difficulties and left the business. So on money.
Oh, a minus is that it really isn't a great idea for both people to be writers. Somebody should actually be making a living. If both people are starving writers, they may actually be starving.
That is a real downside if you're a couple working in this business. As I said, at the WGA, we teach people to save all their money. We also, in the classes are organized, teach their partners that they shouldn't be fooled by a Hollywood writer's sudden success. Even if they become for a while just a rounding error on the taxes, we urge the spouses to keep their career momentum and their professional licenses going. On the other hand, when both couples are writers, at least they understand it. They usually don't have the belief that's going to last forever and that it's time to buy the world's biggest house. And they don't fight over savings. They usually understand that they better save.
Although they often do end up buying ridiculously big cars. And a true story, in my own life, I have a friend whose wife told me that she wanted to quit her job because she was only making $50,000 a year and that he was making that much from one script, and it took him 2 weeks to write. And she wanted to go on vacations, and so she quit her job. And 2 years later, they lost the house.
And it's that brutal and that sudden. So, and we're getting right down here to near the end of this little thing. How couples deal with power politics on the job. It is, you may get wonderful strategic. I'm just going to rush right through that because they know this by now. It really is a big help that when you have somebody that understands the business you're in, because they're in the business too, that you have 2 minds dealing with these madmen that are trying to make your lives miserable, steal your work and forget to pay you.
And he's a lawyer too, so it really helps me.
Well, there is that. Also, there is really the lovely aspect that when you get notes, and you're conditioned to always think that the notes from editors at the publisher or from the studio are insane. Sometimes the notes actually you're the one that's insane and you've been so traumatized. It helps if you have a spouse who is a little more objective on that particular project and can explain the notes to you and what they mean. But to tell you how sensitive you can be about those notes and seeing your work ruined, I do have a passage that again is utterly true. This has happened to me too many really tragic times. So in this passage, Liam's explained to the dancer, they're driving in a car and he's getting very upset. He's driving, how upset he is that a good teleplay he just finished is being destroyed by bad ideas from the producers for awful, violent, ugly rewrites. He then gets mad at her when she tries to reason with him, as a spouse might with me. And the story he tells her is totally true. I cringe watching scenes in which a character driving a car looks away from the road to have an argument with the passenger. It's the laziest, phoniest thing you can stage. On the street, they'd be dead before they got halfway through a page of dialogue. I dived to the curb and hit the brakes. I couldn't safely contain what was beginning to seize control of my eyes, my breath. I tried to look at her, though that took courage, and explained and confessed the first time I congratulated another writer about their Oscar nomination. They told me they'd been replaced on the film by an uncredited writer who had ruined it, and the idea that it won a nomination sickened them. You have to be careful in Hollywood, even telling people you enjoyed a moment in their show. It seems to be a corollary of Newton's third law, that any line you admire was forced into the script by some hated person's notes or improvised by an actor. It gets to you after a while, how easily what you've created is stolen away from you. But I didn't mean to take it out on you. She touched the tips of her fingers to the dampness on my cheek and said, the anger and dismay of a God who brings forth something out of nothing, then discovers the congregants aren't worshipful, isn't easy to contain. When Moses came back to discover the Israelites bowing to the wrong God, he killed 23,000 of them. She leaned in neatly and kissed me. Te'ezavel, before your penance, you owe me an ice cream sundae too. I mean, this has happened. Oh, it is really tragic. Now, we're really at the conclusion. I'm just going to read one little paragraph here because I've made it all sound so dire. Sometimes it really is wonderful being a novelist or being a Hollywood writer. So this is one last little passage. This is where he's actually happy for a change, just to prove to you it's possible. It was too early to leave. I might never need to sleep again. I went across the parking lot to the sound stages and pretended to check on the progress of the set construction for the courtroom and law offices. The theatrically roofless roofs, the darkened translights, waiting illumination, they were a perfect setting for running through all I remembered of My Fair Lady, Camelot, and Funny Girl, while the tropically breezy ride home in my newly delivered car, Gary, the line producer, had sprung for a convertible, inspired a reprise of South Pacific, during which I cheerfully rewrote twin soliloquies into a song about a cultured dancer and, modestly, a little hack. Over dinner in my room of Polynesian pineapple chicken and corn on the cob, I finally remembered to call my agent. He was proud of himself for improving my deal and glad to be staying. I found myself congratulating him. So that is the life of a couple in Hollywood and in prose and print. So we have time here for discussion and questions. So what's going on, gang? And by the way, I keep staring at you all down here. I'm going to move you up to the top screen, so I'm staring at the camera and you all too.
All righty. Y'all, that was hilarious. And now I understand why it really wasn't that big of a deal to come to Jefferson, Texas. If you have to deal with that every day. Good Lord. Good. I understand. I understand because I've had my little dealings too. So anybody have any questions for this couple in Hollywood? There's got to be something. Because every one of you email me, how do I get my book made into a film?
Oh, you want your book made? You want to go through all that? Yeah. So, Randy, are you selecting people? Something? I see hands going up, or who's?
Yep, those are
so
people who want to talk.
Carol's ready.
Okay, go.
Hey, Carol.
Hey there, that was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing both the candor and it's almost like tragedy and comedy all wrapped in one. That was incredible. Thank you so much. I could relate to so much of it. I mean, one of the things that really strikes me is I often find people tell me that they also want to write a novel or they have an idea for a novel. And I think what happens is when good writing makes reading easy. And when reading is easy, people mistake that and think that the writing is easy.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you agree with that insight. Same thing with watching TV, right? You know, consuming a great show seems so easy. You think that writing it must be easy, and it's so untrue.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, everybody knows how to write something down. Everybody knows how to read, and
what I say is everybody who went to high school thinks they know how to write.
And constantly people have the rationalization. I write a lot in this book about, we just talked about the business aspects of the book. This book is actually about irrationality, about fantasy, which is why it's a dancer who creates all these fantasies for men and a writer who creates all these fantasies for the world. People always have the fantasy that they'd write if only they had enough time.
Yeah.
Also, on the other hand, they're also crippled sometimes by writers' fantasies. Writers, when they write about writing, not me, there are passages in this book about what you go through doing a rewrite. Writers, when they create, Amadeus or these other shows about creativity, usually lie and say, comes on you in a burst of inspiration, which absolutely was not true for Mozart or Schaeffer. And so then people go, well, it didn't come on a burst of inspiration last night. I didn't get 50 pages of novel. I guess I'm not a writer. So it goes both ways. People think it's too easy and people think it's too hard.
So true.
So,
Well, I see you have other questions, but if you have a moment or if other people ask, I'd love to know, because I feel like I keep hearing people saying Hollywood's looking for ideas and wants to, get ideas from novels. I don't know if that's a myth, and if you want to bust that myth, or if you feel like there's any validity.
Well, no, that's important.
They
That-
do.
yeah.
When I was with William Morris, they gave me a list of all the books that had been published that month. And did I want to do a movie for one of the books?
Yeah, I mean, it cuts various ways. Hollywood is desperate for material in that we're now at peak TV, and we thought it leveled out, and it hasn't. The study was just published yesterday by FX Networks that there are almost 600 series, and this is not films and long form, 600 scripted series in
Wow.
streaming now, which is an all-time record.
I wish that had been true when I was writing television.
So, much of this is taken from novels. The concept, the character development. Of course, there's the irony that the film, the actual theatrical film business is rather less interested probably in novels than it used to be. The Nicholas Sparks sort of things still survive in feature films, but I think that's waning and they are moving to high budget streaming also. But of course, as we all know, the foundation of theatrical film now is not novels, it's comic books. And it really is, it's comic books. I mean, it's the whole Marvel and the DC universe of characters. So Hollywood desperately wants to see ideas already worked up. So they love novels. It doesn't mean they're going to pay much for the novels. And it doesn't mean the novelist is going to have much control. But I mean, my goodness, between Marvel and J.K. Rowling's, that's about the entire freaking film business. So yes, they do want ideas out of novels. Of course, there's so many novels, thousands and thousands of novels and self-published mysteries and on and on. The competition to be the novel they get an idea from can still be horrendous and terribly chancy.
Wow.
So much.
So
Who's
what,
next?
yeah.
Ginger,
I was just wondering, and I was a little late to this show. So, do you have with Zoom and all of the electronic working from home? Do you have to be in Hollywood to make it now? I mean, you used to
Yes.
have to go to Hollywood. Is that still true?
Yeah, you still have to be in Hollywood. I mean, it is absolutely true that with Zoom and whatnot, that once you're in Hollywood, you may go back and be virtually in Hollywood in Zoom. But even now, some shows are trying to get people back into the room. They're testing them in the morning and putting them in their mask, but they're putting them back in the story room. When I started, of course, before self-publishing became really possible with Amazon and whatnot, when I started, you really had to go to New York if you're going to break in print. If you're going to become a journalist, if we were really going to see agents and editors, you better spend some time in New York, living in Greenwich Village and walking your manuscripts around. I think that's less true for prose now than it is for Hollywood. But in Hollywood, it is so hard to break in. Last year, the Writers Guild took in 600 new members. However, it lost. People went, involuntarily inactive because they didn't have enough recent writing credits in the past 4 to 7 years. It lost 400. So there were 200 people that was the entire increase in the pool. And yet we have seen in my lifetime the proliferation of film schools and MFA programs. So, there's screenwriter Twitter. If you go on Twitter, there are vast sub-ecologies on Twitter of people that are desperate to enter Hollywood. And there's now this horrible secondary industry of all these screenwriting competitions that let them enter so they feel like they're being read and judged and they're getting close, and all sorts of other screenwriters who can't sell a screenplay are making money running the competitions. So you got to be in Hollywood. And the horrible thing is you're going to graduate with $100,000, $200,000 in student debt. and for your MFA, because student debt for graduate degrees is unlimited by the federal government. And then you're going to work as a secretary. You're going to be a writer's assistant. You're going to be a writer's assistant taking the notes of all the other writers in a writer's room, being first in and last out, and having absolutely no life. And right now, trying to organize a union and trying to work up a strike so you at least get paid a living wage.
I had a student, I was teaching at UCLA in their professional screenwriting program. And some of my students, a lot of them wanted to get into the MFA program. And most of them didn't have the talent, and I would not push them. But I had one student who knew everything about film. He was adorable. He was easy to work with. He was creative. And so I really gave him a terrific recommendation for the MFA program. So he goes to school for 2 years, runs up debt. His wife is working. And he came over to lunch at my house with his mother. And his mother said, I thought when he got this graduate degree, he'd get a job.
He did as a writer's assistant, but he never graduated to writer.
He never got a job working in television and in Hollywood.
So what we got here? We got more hands there.
This is Janet Oakley.
Hey, Janet.
Hi, Janet.
I went to a book to film conference twice in Spokane. It's very interesting. A lot of Hollywood people live around Spokane because they want to get away from it all.
Yeah.
The thing that was so intriguing to me is that I learned how to develop a pitch, which not only include my reviews, but I had to figure out how much it's going to cost, where could it be shot. So that was part of it. How many interior scenes do you have? How many exterior scenes do you have? And could you substitute, California or Vancouver, BC for your thing? That was an eye opener, and I'm still trying to do it. This was a thing where you met representatives from from big TV shows. This is about 4 years ago. So you're meeting the rep who could pitch your idea. So it was just a big learning experience, and I'm very realistic about it, but I'm still kind of dreaming about a 6-part series on Netflix,
Yeah, it's gotten very elaborate, and there's sort of 2 tracks in pitching. I mean, people put together pitch decks with PowerPoint, illustrations, and they do everything that you're talking about and then some. And what you're really talking about is what used to be done by line producers and first ADs breaking down a script after it was already well underway. But again, as in publishing, where agents have to do everything, they have to do all of the editing and much of the marketing. The screenwriters and directors who are pitching and producers who are pitching have to do almost all the work of development like that. On the other hand, and here, here's the horrible thing. One reason you have to do it in such an elaborate fashion is that the next person they're going to meet that day is Chandra Rhimes or whatnot, and who's going to give them one sentence. And unless it's a terrible sentence, they're going to much prefer to develop that one sentence.
They won't lose their job.
I did 6 pilots before I became a novelist and pretty much left Hollywood, though I do have something under option at the moment. But I did 6 pilots, and out of 20, 30, 40 pitches, all 6 pilots that I did, 2 of them were to film, were 1-sentence pitches. Because
that's what I learned. I learned
Yeah.
how to do that. It's a long sentence, but I have all the key things that they were looking for. And again, it's really hard to take your novel. It's worse. The log line is worse than writing a synopsis.
Yeah.
Or a tagline. It was hard, but I think I got the essence down, the beats that they might see. And I had several people interested. It's not going to go far, but it's still, learning how it works, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I've been in classes where they teach. I was in a class at AFI where I was the guest that they were pitching to, and they were teaching them this formal pitch pattern that would take them 30 minutes and no executive would ever listen to in the real world, unless they really wanted to do it and they had genuine questions. So you got to sell it, in the first minute. So anyway, I see more questions, and we're also getting down in time, but we're here.
Yeah.
Go to it.
Hi.
I just wanted to add, I'm a novelist and I've had a couple of close things where a TV studio was going to look at my series and then they got taken over by somebody else. And I now have
Always.
an agent and they handle the Dune movies, so they've got big connections and they
Who's your agent?
novels, but it's always, well, maybe next year. So it's
Who's your agent?
not an easy thing. And I just sit back and go, well, that would be some great dessert if it happened. But, I really admire the persistence and talent that you folks have. It's hard. Yeah.
Sarah, first of all, I love your backdrop. What is
thank you.
Is that?
It's my office mess disguised.
It's gorgeous. It's really gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
So when you were pitching, who are you pitching to?
Well, actually, my agent was doing it for me.
Who is your agent?
It's Cine-Lit representation in Hollywood. Mary Alice Keir and Anna Cottle. I don't know if you know them. So I wasn't directly involved with it. Yeah.
No, it's, I once, in the Fantasy and Science Fiction Writers Journal, which is really, was really a wonderful writing journal. They had two experienced editors who did an article on the myth that the best stuff will always get published eventually. And they named all the projects that they had had as editors that for one reason or another, they couldn't fit into the slot in the magazine that month or senior editor next or whatnot. And they said, no, they didn't get published and they were the best things. 20 years ago, Variety interviewed a director on how he found his film projects, a very hot director. And he outlined how the project that really triggered them interviewing him, because it had just been a big film, had been the worst of the three that he had wanted to make. But the cast, financing, something similar at the network, or at the studio had gotten in the way. So he made, good luck to that poor writer, the worst of the three. And still have not made the other two and probably wouldn't. So it is that hard. It's that chaotic. And of course, it's that chaotic. If you're publishing a curated novel with a traditional publisher, it's that chaotic. We already have our novel set in the War of 1812. This is better, but that one's just being released. Sorry. There you are. So do we have time for more? Do other people want to say something?
I think we're out of time, aren't we, Mandy? Betty, are we out of time? Betty's nodding her head.
Yes, we are.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're just going to have you back. I mean, we'll get you on the Book and Film Club. We'll have you back. But anyway, I have learned if I want to know anything about Hollywood, these are the people I go to and I listen because they have been through so much, and it's tough, you guys. I've dealt with a lot of Hollywood issues, haven't I, Lorraine? And and for those that don't know, I had an option from DreamWorks, and that doesn't mean anything. Okay, I had an option. It buckled me to my knees. And I thought I made it, but I thought that when I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show or when I was on Good Morning America. The fact of the matter is, you just keep doing what you love, people. You just keep doing what you love. And you don't worry about the fame, the fortune, the money, unless you just can't eat. You just keep going. And that's what I've seen them do. And we'll have to let you go, you guys. I hate it. We need
And
like
buy the
days.
book. Oh, what a beautiful cover.
I really cannot wait to get my copy, and I'll be sharing it with the world. And if you haven't read Lorraine Despres' books, my God, you've got to read The Scandalous Summer of Cissy LeBlanc. I mean, just, you can Google her. She's on Facebook. Aren't you on Facebook, Lorraine?
I'm willing to answer any questions on Facebook. I love having people look at me on Facebook.
Anyway, and hopefully when we go back live again, we can get them back. Okay.
I love your live,
On live events.
Oh my God, I haven't danced that much since.
I know. Tell your quick
I'm dancing
story.
around the living room.
Yeah, there you go. And you guys are such a wonderful couple. It's wonderful. But Lorraine, tell him the story that you wrote about when you came to your first girlfriend weekend. What happened?
And give me a hint.
Well, it was in Marshall, Texas, and it was
Yeah.
the Hollywood theme one. And you came, and it took you how many plane rides?
Oh my God. Yes, it took me 2 plane rides, and then I rented a car. And then this was very early in the
GPS.
GPS. And I could have just taken this highway and gotten there. No, I had a GPS, which took me way into the woods. Finally, I was going to, and then the road stopped being paved and I kept going. And then the gravel got stopped. And finally, I got to somebody's house. And it wasn't yours.
Yes, the early history of GPS. Now it even more authoritatively gets us to the same place.
And we had pie. We had pie. So anyway, you guys I love you. I mean, I love you so much. They actually helped me get an agent in Hollywood for that deal I struck with DreamWorks, but only time will tell. I just put myself into everything I do. And if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I just love this. I love this world, and I'll do it no matter what. And keep eating beanie weenies. So y'all, we'll see you back. We
Thank
gotta come
you.
back. We've got 2 more couples coming on board that are going to be talking about the writing port, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. So you guys should come back and listen to Denise Kiernan and her husband, and Leslie Lear, who just sold her Salma Hayek purchased it for an HBO series that's about boobs.
Yeah, well.
So it's next on the
Sounds like Salma Hayek.
So,
Okay.
well, thank you. I'll be in touch. Tell Karen Essex hi. And
we will. We're talking to her later today.
Everybody, big love.
Bye.
Bye.